the US economy is doing well, and we know Trump's policies are generally pro-growth, and there's some ambiguity about inflation, maybe higher inflation. That's fine. The problem is that the Fed's policies of these higher rates and a strong dollar are being absorbed by the rest of the world. And the rest of the world hasn't got that benefit of the Trump pro-growth policies. And we're starting to see some wobbles, aren't we? The UK bonds have wobbled a little bit, French bonds, in Brazil in emerging markets. And it's basically because the US is pushing its domestic tight monetary policy on the rest of the world. That's fine. Again, that will work perfectly well. The US will probably outperform for a little bit longer. But eventually that weakness, those vulnerabilities that I was talking about, they generally tend to feed back into the global economy, back into the US. And I think that's why we're going to see some global slowdown. And ultimately, by the end of the year, I think the Fed will be cutting rates again, maybe as early as March, who knows. But definitely this is just a pause. I think the Fed will continue to cut rates later on this year.
We got three dovish prints on inflation progress, you could say, from the UK to the US this week with the PPI to CPI. How much are you looking at the risk of upside to that if it does go the other way, depending on how thick and fast these tariffs are actually implemented?
Yeah, well, it's one print, so it was a relief because the markets were looking quite vulnerable at that time. So thank goodness we got that lower than expected data. But it's just one print. We also get the sort of menu type inflation, the start of the year. That'll be next month's print, won't it, for the US? That's probably the most important because companies might only change some of their prices once in January. So that'll feed through in the next month. And actually core inflation in the US is still way above target. And it's been a bit sticky, hasn't it, for the last few months as well. So you definitely can't say that this has been a victory. Inflation is still an issue. Look, the big downside risk to what I was describing before about being overweight equities, underweight credit, the big downside risk is if inflation starts to come back. President Trump, in his inauguration, if he starts talking about very strong tariffs in terms of the immigration flows, these policies that could lift inflation, that would be the one big concern for me.